the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in court. You have the right to talk to a lawyer for advice before we ask you any questions. You have the right to have a lawyer with you during questioning. If you cannot afford a lawyer, one will be appointed for you before any questioning if you wish. If you decide to answer questions now without a lawyer present, you have the right to stop answering at any time. Now cuff them and book them. We'll look into all kinds of crime on this week's episode of FYI. Welcome to For Your Info.
En inglés.
You got it. Welcome to another exciting edition of FYI, and today we're going to take a look at crime. We're going to tackle crime. To tackle means abordar. Let's take a look at our intro. I started out by saying freeze, and I think you can tell from the context what freeze means. I think you say alto in Spanish. It means stop whatever you're doing and drop your weapon if you have one. Then I started to read the Miranda rights. I'm sure you've all heard this in movies. Let's go through it. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say or do can be used against you in a court. You have the right to talk to a lawyer. And that's an interesting word because you can say a lawyer, you can say an attorney, and the British, you know what they say? They say a barrister. And if you want to say abogado del diablo, then it's devil's advocate. Yeah, I know, that's a confusing one. That's why I wanted to clear it up. And be careful with the word advice. Advice is never advices. It's let me ask you for some advice. And the verb is to advise. Does anyone know the app TripAdvisor? So advise, verb, advice, noun. You also have the right to have a lawyer with you during questioning. Another way of saying questioning is interrogation. Sound familiar? If you can't afford a lawyer, one will be appointed for you before any questioning if you wish. Si lo desees. If you decide to answer questions now without a lawyer present, you have the right to stop answering at any time. Blah, 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 blah. Basically, you're under arrest. You're busted. These are two different ways to say caught, pillado. I guess it makes sense because I know you say detenido in Spanish, but you can also say arrestado. And thankfully, I've never been arrested. I've never been through the criminal justice system. Knock on wood. I like to keep my nose clean. I think we've looked at this expression before. To keep your nose clean means to stay out of trouble. And then I said, now cuff him and book him. And there's another way to say arrest him, book him, means bring him into the station, to the jail, to the police precinct. And to cuff somebody is to put them in handcuffs. You call them wives in Spanish, esposas. So are you guys ready to look at crime or look into it? To look into is another way of saying to investigate, to research. As always, we should start out by defining it. What is crime? Or a crime, un delito. In ordinary language, a crime is an unlawful act punishable by a state or other authority. The term crime does not, in modern criminal law, have any simple and universally accepted definition. So we can't really define it. It depends on each society. Though statutory definitions have been provided for certain purposes. The most popular view is that crime is a category created by law. In other words, something is a crime if declared as such by the relevant and applicable law. Another proposed definition is that a crime or offense, criminal offense, is an act harmful not only to some individual, but also to a community, society, I want you to pronounce that one with me, society, or the state. Such acts are forbidden and punishable by law. Do you know the superhero, the Punisher, from the comics? El castigador? Well, to punish is castigar. It goes on to say, the notion that acts such as murder, rape, and theft are to be prohibited exists worldwide. So translation, there isn't a society where that isn't frowned upon and illegal in most cases. And to be frowned upon means in Spanish mal visto. What precisely is a criminal offense is defined by the criminal law of each relevant jurisdiction. The state, and I don't mean New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, I mean el Estado, the government has the power to severely restrict one's liberty for committing a crime. Remember, we don't commit mistakes, we make mistakes. We commit crimes, or hopefully we don't commit crimes, and we keep our nose clean. In modern societies, there are procedures to which investigations and trials must adhere. If found guilty, an offender may be sentenced to a form of reparation, such as a community sentence. In the United States, we call this community service. This is when you have to do work in the community. I think it's the lightest sentence out there. It's what we would call a slap on the wrist. And we're going to look at some really good idiomatic expressions in the bonus part. We'll also take a look at tons of fun facts, crazy laws that still exist. We'll look at crime in pop culture. We'll look at the dark side and that debate whether prison works. Are people being rehabilitated, or is it making them into more hardened criminals? The perfect example is you throw a kid in jail because he got caught with some drugs, and now he's among rapists and thieves. Not exactly the perfect environment for a kid who screwed up, for a kid who was just being a kid. But we'll take a look at that debate later. We'll also take a look at capital punishment and tons of vocabulary and idiomatic expressions. I hope you guys join us in the bonus part. If you'd like to join us there, all you have to do is go over to patreon.com/Alberto Alonso and join my curious community. Once you're in, you have access to this bonus episode and all the ones that came before and after. And just remember, that's a lot of content. You can also get PDF documents every week with all the vocabulary, expressions, and structures. And if you're in our higher levels, our super duper students and our interstellar students, well, then you even get a weekly class with me. And if you're in interstellar, which is our highest level, you get the weekly class with me and a monthly private class. So that's 5 classes a month with me. If you want more information about that, go to patreon.com/Alberto Alonso. And I'd like to take a moment to send a shout out to all my patrons, especially my super duper students, Marta, Javier, and Paco. And don't forget about my interstellar students, the ones who get a private class with me every month, as well as all the rest of the stuff. Carmen, Lina, Isa, Paco, David, Jose Maria, Patricio, and Edgar. You guys friggin' rock. Keep it up. And if you're not sure if you want to be a member of my community, reach out and I can send you a sample of what we've got, what you're missing out on, and hopefully you'll join us over at patreon.com/Alberto Alonso. All right, let's rewind right now and take a look at crime in history. Supposedly, restrictions on behavior have existed in all prehistoric societies. Crime in early human society was seen as a personal transgression, and instead of having police or some kind of organized people to enforce the law, it was the community who enforced the law. And to enforce means to make sure people follow it. So there was no formal legal system with a judge and a jury. Oh, by the way, there's a good idiomatic expression. What are you, judge and jury? ¿Qué te crees, el juez de todos? So sometimes it was the use of a custom, a religion, or a tribal leader who would enforce it. But it was enforced collectively. Some of the oldest writings in existence to this day, and I'm talking about criminal codes here, was the Code of Urunamu. and this incorporated retaliation. Justice with retaliation. It was called, or I should say is called, the Code of Hammurabi, and this has influenced crime across several civilizations. How it's seen, how it's dealt with. Also the Romans. We can't talk about anything in this world without talking about the Romans, it seems. The Romans, they organized their laws. Remember, they tried to organize everything, the roads, irrigation, so they were obviously thinking of laws as well. And obviously, the bigger the empire got, the harder it was to enforce laws, or the more law enforcement agents you needed. I imagine back then they were soldiers and commanders, not cops in New York City with a big belly chowing down on donuts. Oh, and you want a fun fact? Why are cops always associated with donuts? Well, in the United States, it was customary in donut shops for cops to get free donuts. They would even have seats reserved. So when they came, they would always have a table. And obviously, the donut makers were doing this because if cops are eating in your restaurant, nobody's going to give you any trouble. And even when they're not there, if you call them, they'll come in a jiffy. Of course, you got to give them free donuts. So it's not a myth. There actually is a link between cops and donuts, at least in the United States. We'll take a look at more fun facts in the bonus part. Now, a lot of things since the early days are still in existence today. Things like violence and theft being punishable by law, well, that's still something to this day. And even if you look at the Bible, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal. I mean, the Bible even had their own set of laws. And China as well. You can never talk about prehistory without talking about China. They've had a criminal justice system for over 2,000 years, and I don't want to find out how it works. No thanks. Now, many of the earliest conceptions of crime are associated with sin. As we just said, the Bible, thou shalt not commit adultery. Well, back in the day, adultery was considered a crime in certain places. Now, I don't think it is anymore. But the other 10 commandments make sense. No stealing, no killing. Now, common law was first developed in England under the rule of Henry II. This was in the 12th century. He established a system of traveling judges, and what they did is they tried accused criminals. To try means to put on trial, to bring them to court. And he would travel around England, or better said, he would send these judges to travel around England and try people. And I guess that was also to send a message to people like, hey, if you break the laws, we're going to find you. It doesn't matter where you are. They don't just apply to the big cities anymore. And also in the 12th century in England, this is where they started recording official crime data, which now we know this is a big business. Crime stats, analyzing all the data. Even when I was preparing these episodes, I came across a lot of statistics. And we'll take a look at some in the bonus part. The astounding statistics of how many people are incarcerated in my country, in the US of A. In the modern era, crime came to be seen as an issue that affected society rather than conflicts between two neighbors or two individuals. Writers such as Thomas Hobbes saw crime as a societal issue, and this was in the 17th century. That still exists today. Because if there's a lot of crime in a certain area, obviously there are deeper-seated problems. The crime is always linked to something: poverty, lack of resources. I'm not saying these are excuses. These are just factors. And I took a criminology class. We had some free electives at university, and it was absolutely fascinating. I just remember, saying, wow, I really chose the right class. And that's because it was an early morning class. I was half asleep, but it was really fascinating because when you study crime, you're studying a lot of different things: psychology, sociology. It really is a fascinating field. And we're going to talk about criminology in just a moment. But imprisonment developed as a long-term penalty for crime around the 18th century. And then, with increasing urbanization and industrialization in the 19th century, this caused crime to become an immediate issue that affected society. It was no longer you versus your neighbor. Now the state was going to intervene. And around this time is when the field of criminology came about. And obviously, criminology is the study of crime. It's a subfield of sociology, and it addresses issues of social norms, social order, deviance, and violence. As I said before, it includes the motivations, consequences, and perpetrators of crime, as well as preventative measures. How to prevent crime from happening in the future, or at least to lower the crime rate. And so they do this by studying criminal acts. They also study the relationship of crime in the community. As we said, it's a societal thing. And that's something that Thomas Hobbes said in the 17th century. This isn't about an individual. And as with all fields, there are a lot of differing opinions of what causes crimes, what kind of people commit crimes, how to deal with crime prevention, and so on and so forth. And something that's extremely popular these days is forensic science. Ever since we're able to trace DNA, this field has blown up. You can see it even in popular culture with programs like CSI. CSI stands for Crime Scene Investigation. It seems like society as a whole is obsessed with crime. Just go to Netflix. Half of the documentaries are about killers or crimes or serial killers, kidnappings, you name it. And I guess the mass media has something to do with this too, because a lot of times we glorify crime. We put serial killers on a pedestal. By the way, if you haven't listened to the episode on serial killers, give it a listen. But just look at Charles Manson. The guy was as famous as Madonna and James Dean. And so mass media knows this, and they exploit it. They don't talk about nice things that happen. They talk about crime. And the more brutal the crime, the more heinous the crime, the better. In media, they have an expression that says, if it bleeds, it leads. And to lead is to be the number one story. So now we have sensationalized crime and even normalized it, it seems. Ted Bundy, another horrible killer. And I've seen conversations on social media where they say, oh, he's sexy. And he was even played by Zac Efron. Maybe we need to take a look at how we look at crime as a society. And I'm the first guy who loves to watch, mob movies and The Sopranos. But I think everything should be in context. I do not think kids should be seeing this stuff. And we'll talk about that too. We'll talk about violent video games and all that jazz. But by the way, you can learn some crimes and many more things from video games. All right, let me put you to the test. How do you say robo de coches? Did you say Grand Theft Auto? Yeah, like the video game. Now, this is a video game that I used to play, but I would never, ever in a million years give this to a child. Let's take a look at the different kinds of crime. You've got felonies, and a felony is the worst offense. This is an indictable offense. You've got an infraction, which is also called a violation. And then you've got a misdemeanor or a summary offense. We usually call it misdemeanor, at least in the United States. And felonies are things such as murder, things like that. A felony is the most serious offense. Let's take a look at crime by categories. And what I'm going to do is just go over some of the most common ones, the ones you'll see in the media. Let's start with offenses against a person. You've got assassination, assault, battery, child abuse, criminal negligence, defamation, domestic violence, harassment, home invasion, homicide, human trafficking, kidnapping, manslaughter, negligent homicide, robbery, stalking, and torture. Sounds like fun. I'm just kidding, guys. Then you've got sexual offenses. In some places, adultery is still a sexual offense. You've also got indecent exposure. Jim Morrison was arrested for that from The Doors. In some places, homosexuality is a criminal offense. Public masturbation, prostitution, sex trafficking, rape, voyeurism, and the list goes on. Then you've got crimes against property. Arson. Arson means starting a fire on purpose. A lot of times this is done for insurance purposes, to collect the money. You've got arms trafficking. You've got blackmail, bribery, embezzlement, extortion, burglary, forgery, intellectual property violation, larceny, looting, pickpocketing, smuggling. This is metiendo contrabando. By the way, all these words are in the PDF documents because there's a lot of vocabulary this week, folks. You've got tax evasion, vandalism, trespassing, and mischief. Again, those are crimes against property. Then you've got crimes against the public. That's begging. That's right, begging for money on the street can be a crime against the public. So can genocide. That's two very different sides of the spectrum. Illegal consumption of drugs or alcohol, piracy, and even war crimes. Again, that category is crimes against the public. Crimes against animals, cruelty to animals, poaching. Poaching is illegal hunting. Wildlife smuggling, there's that word smuggle again. Bestiality, this means fornicating with animals. So there are many things you can get busted for. I'll give you an idiomatic expression that we use. We say crime doesn't pay, and this means no vale la pena el crimen, el delito. Let's take a look at a little fun fact before we get going over here. The Chicago Tribune conducted a study, and they found that certain crimes increase when the temperatures are higher and decrease when the temperature goes down. Crimes that occur most during hot days include assault, shootings, theft, and vandalism. So they believe that hot temperatures compel people to focus less on the future, and then they lose their self-control, which then leads to aggressive behavior and violence. So that's interesting. I never knew that the climate, the weather, had something to do with crimes or the crime rate. Again, there are many, many studies, and a lot of them are contradicting. But that's what makes this field so interesting. In the bonus part, as I said, we're going to take a look at the profile of a serial killer. We'll also take a look at some fun facts. Bad boys, what you gonna do? What you gonna do when they come for you? Also, crime in movies and music and pop culture, and so much more. And I'll wrap up by saying, while crime doesn't pay, we just looked at that, no vale la pena, listening to FYI will pay off. And to pay off is to be fruitful. So now that you know both of those, to pay and to pay off, I'll give you the sentence again. While crime doesn't pay, listening to FYI does pay off. Sí que da frutos. I hope you guys enjoyed the first part, and I hope you'll join us in the bonus episode of this week's FYI.